Hello, how you doing? Every year, the big book chain Waterstones announces one title as their book of the year, and recently they've begun to run this almost more like a book prize in that a few weeks before their book of the year is announced on December 1st, they will announce a shortlist of different titles in contention for this place, and these books range from fiction to non-fiction, including books about history and nature writing and memoir and cookbooks, as well as young adult fiction and children's books. So yeah, a whole range of different titles, and then one book is selected from this list. So I thought it would be fun to survey the different books that have been listed for Waterstones Book of the Year, and I don't have any illusions that these titles are chosen by booksellers. I mean, I don't know how they come up with their list, but I assume it's more a consensus that's formed by marketing executives, that come up with this group of books. But I also think it's really fun to survey some of the different books that are kind of the most popular books of the past year, as well as like enjoying them as aesthetic objects. And I want to do that because I took a trip to Waterstones in Piccadilly, which is a really big shop and one of my favorite bookstores to go to that I've really enjoyed going to ever since I first moved to London. There's just so many different floors on it, and this video isn't sponsored by Waterstones, but genuinely this is just one of my favorite bookstores to go to like browse around different books. And so I thought it would be fun to sort of go there and try to find the different titles that are up for this year's book of the year, which wasn't all that difficult because they have different stations where they have created piles of these different titles, calling them as one of their shortlists of the book of the year. But also I really enjoy in this shop how they have different author events, and I've seen a number of different authors speaking there, as well as they have like wonderful displays of like cloth bound classic books on a whole table. That's really lovely to see, as well as sections for independent publishers like Fitzcarraldo Editions and their blue and white titles. You can see a whole bookshelf filled with those books, as well as a real great LGBTQ like section of books. And so yeah, it's just a really wonderful shop to browse around and look at all these different books. So yeah, I thought I would go through each of these titles, talk about all of them individually, as well as showing them off. And because for a lot of these books, they will have like special or like limited editions of these different titles, which are really like beautiful aesthetic objects, as well as being the contents of them, being really fascinating and interesting to read about. So yeah, I'm going to go through all of the different books. There's 10 different books up for this year's Waterstones Book of the Year. And first off, there's the nonfiction title, The Escape Artist by Jonathan Freedland. And this is a nonfiction book about the first two Jewish men to have escaped from the concentration camp Auschwitz during World War II, which was an incredible feat to have actually done, and how one of these men had an incredible memory, and he was able to write down and record after he escaped a lot of the things which were actually going on in this camp. And obviously a lot of the nations outside didn't know what was actually happening in these concentration camps because information was being like tightly held by Germany. And so yeah, his account of this really influenced some of the world leaders of the Allied forces that fought against Germany, in motivating them to want to fight against what was happening in Germany. And so yeah, it follows that very dramatic and incredible account. And so yeah, this book, in the inside cover, it has a overview shot shot of the concentration camps in Germany, and it also, this title was also shortlisted for the Bell Gifford Prize this year, which is a nonfiction award, and it reminds me somewhat of this different book called The Volunteer by Jack Fairweather, which was published a few years ago, and it won the overall Costa Book of the Year for that year, and it's a nonfiction account about a Polish officer that purposely went into Auschwitz to try to infiltrate this concentration camp and to try to lead a resistance from within the camp itself. And he was also sending out reports about what was going on in this actual camp. So yeah, that was also a great nonfiction book, and it just kind of like reminds me of the subject of this book. Next up is the novel Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus, and this is a story set in 1960s in America, and is about a female scientist who struggles a bit with gender stereotypes within her profession and field amongst her colleagues, and in a number of years later she becomes this TV chef whose recipes and how she talks about food is very much inspired by the science and the chemistry behind what she's making, so it gives a different spin on the whole sort of celebrity cookery school like that. And this book was also shortlisted for the Waterstones first debut fiction award, which took place earlier this year in the summer, but also the special edition they have of the book it's beautiful. On the sides of it there are sprayed the periodic table, but also on the inside of the book there's the periodic table there. So yeah, it's a really lovely edition of the book, and so many people love this debut novel. Otherlands by Thomas Halliday. This is a nonfiction book looking at the history of our world and different life forms that have inhabited our planet through different eras of time. So the author takes us on this kind of guided nature tour through these different eras, first going back hundreds of years, then thousands of years, and then millions of years, to when the actual surface and atmosphere and environment of our planet looked very, very different from how it does today. And he uses evidence of this to imaginatively recreate the planet during these different eras and give you a kind of overview of how the environment looked, but also these different life forms existed alongside each other during these periods of time. And it is so fascinating and wondrous, and I just enjoyed reading this so much. It was also shortlisted for this year's Wainwright Prize, and yeah, I just love how in the book he shows these maps of how the planet actually looked during these different eras, as well as picking out a different life form from these different periods of time and showing how it would have looked in these different drawings. I do wish there were more illustrations of this in this book of sort of imaginatively recreating these weird and wonderful different life forms, but yeah, it is such a fantastic read. The Story of Art Without Men by Katy Hessel, and this is an account and history of art, but focusing on female artists and the way women have contributed to the evolution of art over the centuries, because traditionally women have been sidelined in the art world. So yeah, it's focusing on that, and as you would expect, there's a lot of beautiful pictures and illustrations in this to sort of bring this history of art alive, and their special edition of it is really gorgeous and is also signed by the author. Next is the very popular and much discussed novel Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is a fantasy novel and a revisionist history, and it starts in 1828 when an orphaned Chinese boy is taken to Oxford to the Royal Institute of Translation to study there about languages and translation. And they don't only do translations there, but also create these silver bars which contain all the meanings which are lost in translation. And so yeah, it tells this very dramatic story. And I do love this like beautiful edition of the book, and how on the back of the book there's this kind of tower. And so yeah, I bought this a while ago. It's one of the big books I want to read before the end of the year. I actually bought my copy from Daunt Books, and so just to prove that this video isn't actually sponsored by Waterstones. Then there's the cookbook Cooking by Jeremy Lee, who's the proprietor chef at Quo Vadis in London, which is a really fancy restaurant. I've only eaten at once, but it was very good. So the description for this book is good food honed with great ingredients, which is really general and sort of doesn't tell you all that much about it. So I really enjoyed flipping through this book when I went to Waterstones, and it includes a lot of really good looking recipes as well as beautiful illustrations. And sort of I just love looking and flipping through cookbooks and picking out recipes I'd really like to make. I especially liked the look of this one recipe called a bramble brulee. Another big fiction title from this year, The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell, and this is a novel set in Italy in the 1500s and follows a daughter of the Medici family, this famous, very wealthy and influential family, and how she's sort of in the background and amongst her family, but then becomes much more center stage when there's a death, and she is wed to a very powerful man. And it's about the challenges she faces and the difficulty of that. Now, in Waterstones, there was a whole display dedicated to this novel, as well as Maggie O'Farrell's book. I mean, she became really famous when her novel Hamnet won the Women's Prize for fiction. And yeah, she's such a wonderful author, and this is a book I've been really meaning to read. Now, you have a choice with this book. There's the standard edition, which is really beautiful, and on the inside cover of that there's an illustration of a tiger, which is really gorgeous. And but also Waterstones have a very special edition which is very expensive, which costs £75, and I don't even know what that really includes, because the copies in the shop, which they didn't have very many of them, but they were in shrink wrap, so I couldn't actually look inside them of what they were actually like. But there was also a sort of medium priced edition for £25 of this special edition of The Marriage Portrait, which I did get suckered into buying because it is just so beautiful, isn't it? I mean, look at this. It's just, yeah, really gorgeous. But also on the inside cover of this, there's this amazing, beautiful illustration of it, which is so dramatic and gorgeous. And so, yeah, I just had to get this. I think this will be a really wonderful historical fiction story to read over the Christmas break period and just really enjoy. The Golden Mole and Other Living Treasures by Katherine Rundell. This is an absolutely beautiful nature book looking at different wondrous animals on our planet. Some of them are quite exotic animals, others are more commonplace, or what we think of as more commonplace animals, but she gives very short accounts of each of these different animals and why they are so special and unique, and how it's like amazing that they even exist and can do the things that they do. It was so fascinating. I learned so much from this book, and I really enjoyed like reading the book aloud to my husband before bedtime. I would just read a section which they're only like, I think, like 4 or 5 pages long, and also include these beautiful illustrations of all the different animals. So yeah, like wombats and bears and the very ancient Greenland shark, and but also the cover of this book with its like gold and the gold sides of the pages is just so beautiful. I just can't recommend this book enough. It is so wonderful. It was also shortlisted for this year's Books Are My Bag awards in the nonfiction category. And also this year, Katherine Rundell published this biography of John Donne, which I'd also read and which was also fantastic. It shows how he was a kind of of like cult poet of his time, and people kind of passed around his poems. And but also he lived a very varied and fascinating life. So yeah, this was wonderful to read as well. But yeah, Katherine Rundell is a bit of a superstar. Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, a queer graphic novel about two teenage boys that fall in love and all the in and outs of their romance. It's such a beautiful story. It was actually originally published, the first volume of this was first published in 2016, but obviously it became massively famous and well known this year when there was a TV adaptation of it. That I know so many people have like fallen in love with this story, which is so beautiful and delicate and just absolutely wonderful. And Alice Oseman is also a bit of superstar this year in that she won the Reader's Choice Award at the Books Are My Bag Awards, as well as the Breakthrough Author Award. So that was really wonderful to see. And Waterstones have an exclusive edition of this graphic novel that I know a lot of people, and especially young people, have been going wild for. And finally, there's the middle grade fantasy novel called Skandar and the Unicorn Thief by A.F. Steadman. This is about courageous heroes and warrior unicorns in a fantastical landscape. So I'm not all that interested in reading this novel, obviously, because I'm an adult, but I really enjoyed leafing through it, especially because at the beginning of the novel there's a map of this fantastical landscape, and I can just imagine if I was an adolescent and had picked up this book, I would have really wanted to read it, because I just loved any like fantasy novel that had a map inside of it, so I could more, you know, imaginatively place myself in these landscapes. So yeah, those are all of the books that are up for this year's Waterstones Book of the Year. So I really enjoyed like having an excuse to go to the bookstore and actually rummage through these different books, and especially the special editions of these books. And yeah, it's just such a pleasurable experience. But yeah, I'd love to know if you read any of these books and what you think about them, and what you think should be the book of the year. What would be your book of the year? Let me know about that in the comments below. But thanks for following me along on this journey. I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye bye.